Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Thinking Like a Bank, where we show you how to think like a bank by applying the same strategies and principles that banks use to help you find more financial freedom in your life. I'm your host, Sarah Ibrahim. With us today, I have Anthony Vicino. He's a best-selling author, real estate investor, and serial entrepreneur committed to helping people maximize their return on life. He is the co-founding partner of Invictus Capital. I hope I pronounced that right. A multifamily acquisition firm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with $40 million in assets under management that provides busy working professionals with the opportunity to invest better. As the host of the Multifamily Investing Made Simple podcast and author of Passive Investing Made Simple, Anthony firmly believes investing shouldn't be complicated, scary, or overwhelming. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Was that how you pronounce your company name?
It's close. Invictus.
Invictus. Okay, got it. Invictus Capital. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us. Before we talk about real estate and business, can you tell us more about your background and what you do today?
Yeah, I guess, my background, you got to go all the way back and understand. I have like really bad ADHD, and growing up, it was very problematic. I couldn't focus. I was unreliable. I was undisciplined, and it made me a terrible employee. So I was like chronically fired. It was bad. It was really bad. And coming out of college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. But I knew I couldn't cut it in the corporate environment. I knew I couldn't really cut it working for other people. So I had to go off and find my own path. And for a long time, that led me down. I was a professional rock climber, which is really cool. Didn't make a lot of money doing that, but you get to do what you want, live out in the dirt, climb on rocks all day. And that for me is what I wanted. I like freedom is my highest value. And that made me feel free. But I suddenly felt trapped in my life at one point when I went to marry this woman, or, I went to ask her parents if I could marry her. And they looked at me and they're like, well, what are you going to do to provide for her? I was like, at this point, I was just a broke rock climber. And it was the first time like society's expectation of me as a provider and like what that meant, like really conflicted with my value of freedom. And I was like, what's happening here? So I walked away from that and I was like, well, I can't work for somebody else. That's not going to do it. And I never really thought of myself as entrepreneurial at that point. Like I wasn't the kid plucking flowers and selling it to the neighbor. That wasn't me. I didn't have a lemonade stand. The idea of sales scared me. But I knew I had no other choice but to find my own path. And so I started writing science fiction and fantasy novels, which doesn't really sound like a business, but everything that goes into it, like creating the product and then marketing the product, selling, like all of it, the distribution, like that is a business. And it took me many years to realize like the skills that I learned from that actually are what laid the foundation for all of my other business successes. So from there, I built all sorts of things. I had a high-rise window washing company, had a manufacturing company that produced polyurethane rock climbing holds, imported hardware and Baltic birch from Russia. So like been all over the place and done all sorts of things. And some of them are pretty complicated, but the simplest one is real estate. Real estate is just so simple. Like once you understand that there's only so many levers that you have to pull when it comes to a real estate business, and if you pull them at the right time, that you can do pretty well. Like it's just so simple. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simpler than everything else that I ever built. And I love real estate because the reason I started getting into real estate investing was just because after all those businesses that I built and exited, like I wanted to do something that could have more impact on the world around me rather than just like doing well for me and my family and like making a ton of money. Like I wanted to have a vehicle that I could make an impact in real estate. When I looked at the fact that everybody has a relationship with real estate, whether they're a renter or an owner, or, just wishing they had a home, and like everybody has a relationship. So in 2012 or so, I started buying up real estate and haven't stopped since. So that's kind of a long, convoluted story.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned, thanks for mentioning the part of the ADHD part. I did read that in your bio, and I think that you're not alone, right? A lot of people, I think everybody to some extent has ADHD. It's just some a little bit more. But what did you do to overcome that? Like what were some methods or things that you applied to mitigate that or even eliminate that?
Yeah, the interesting thing about ADHD, I think a lot of people have a misconception and they believe that means that we can't focus, when in reality, it's that we can't always control what we're focused on.
Yeah.
But when we are focused, we go into what's known as a hyperfocus state. And this is very similar to the flow state, where you're just like detached from time and detached from yourself and your identity, and you're just locked in and you're in it. the problem with hyperfocus and people with ADHD is that, like, if you can't control what you go into hyperfocus on, then you could hyperfocus on things that are not very helpful, like video games or just getting distracted watching the paint dry. Like, these things happen, right? And so for me, a lot of my life, the struggle was I was hyper-focusing on things that weren't helping me. They weren't moving me forward. And so I had to start creating structures and routines and habits around my life that made it so I was more likely to enter into my hyper-focus state on things that were going to move me forward. And so it was this really weird dichotomy that discipline is freedom. And so by disciplining myself and creating this structure around my life, it actually gave me a ton, like so much more freedom to express myself within that structure. It feels really counterintuitive, but if you're one of those people who you have so many options in front of you and you feel just like you're vibrating with energy and you have this greatness and so much potential and you could go in all these different directions, but you never feel like you're making meaningful progress towards any of it because you're just constantly scattered and going every which way. It's frustrating as all get out, because it's like being a car whose wheels are spinning, but you're just an inch off the ground. And you're like, man, if I could get those wheels on the ground, you're like, we'd be off. And for me, it was about figuring out, how do I shut out 90% of those opportunities, those options, and focus on the one that's right in front of me so I can get those wheels on the ground and get moving forward. And once I did that, things changed.
Yeah. And, you know, when we think of like the word decision, like the Latin breakdown of the word decision, it means to cut out, you know? So that goes to your point, is that when you have too many options, it makes it harder to decide on things. And when you can't decide on things, you focus on the wrong thing. So really, from what I'm hearing from what you're saying, is that decision, discipline, freedom, those are all kind of aligned with each other. And sometimes less is more. Having less decisions and less things to do actually opens up more doors. And definitely, like, it's a really good counterintuitive approach to it. It's like less decisions can lead to actually more freedom. I want to go back. Sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, because I think you're onto such a good concept here, which is like decisions are hard. The idea of cutting out options is scary, because as humans, coming from an evolutionary perspective, like, options are good in the sense that if I choose the wrong thing, I might die, right? Now, if you're standing in a room with 1,000 open doors, that's great, but you can't walk through all those doors. You can only walk through one door at a time. So those options become a barrier to your progress, because now you have infinite potentiality in front of you. And I think this is where they'll resonate with this, because they're like, man, I feel like I can do so much and I feel like I have all this potential, but I can't seem to realize it in any one direction. It's because you have too many options. And it's terrifying to think, well, if I cut this option off, like what's going to happen as a result? And so focus is actually an act of courage. It's crazy to think. If you narrow your focus in on something, you're saying, I'm not going to pay attention to what's on my periphery. You could get eaten by a lion. That's not good. Right. But we're in an environment where you're probably not going to get eaten by a lion anymore. And so if you want to succeed, you have to be able to focus. You have to have the courage to say, this is the thing that I'm running towards. Everything else is irrelevant until I've decided that this is no longer the thing I'm running at. And then I can pivot, I can adapt. And that's one of the great things about being a human. You can change your mind and you can go a different direction, but it has to be with intention.
And how do you make that balance, right, of focusing on something, and when it's not working, you pivot? Or not, when you're not happy with it, you pivot to something else. How do you not bounce around too many times, if that makes sense? If that question makes sense.
A good rule of thumb is that if you're going to pivot, if you're going to change and adapt to something new, you're only allowed to pivot to something that's as hard or harder than what you're currently trying to do. Too often we go down a path and we're like, this is hard. This is way harder than I thought it was going to be, like learning a foreign language. Oh my God, this is so hard. I can't do this. Right. And then we're like, I'm going to pivot to the next thing that looks easier. I can do that over there, that drop shipping on Amazon. That looks easier than what I'm doing over here. Right. And that's why we chase it, is because it looks easier. And that's the wrong reason to pivot, to adapt, and to change. So if you hold yourself to the standard of like, I'm only going to pivot and change to things that are as hard or as ambitious as what I'm currently doing, then you're not going to be able to just pull out that jack of all, the Joker or whatever, the wild card, and say like, oh, that's the easier path. Because that's what's happening, is people go down a path, they realize this is harder than I thought it was going to be. And then they chase the next thing that looks easier, but it's not easier. Every path is equally hard. You just can't see it yet. Right. And if you create the the habit of going 80% down a path and realizing this is hard and then changing path, you are never going to get to the end of any single path. You have to develop the muscle of discipline and follow through. So it's a hard answer. I think self-awareness is the superpower. So you have to be very honest with yourself about why you want to change paths. Is it because it's hard? Is it because it really doesn't spark your soul with joy? Or is it because you're lazy and you want an easier way? You want to get there quicker and you're not willing to do the work? Because if that's the answer, doesn't matter what path you're on, you're not going to win.
That's brilliant. That's literally a perfect explanation. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's that makes so much sense. Is you think that other paths are easy because you just don't see it. You're in your path right now. It's hard. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned you've worked in a lot of different businesses. Like they're not even connected really, these businesses. Did you see though, like overall, like do you believe that like within core principles that every business is somehow related, like that has core principles that you can apply to other businesses?
Yep, 100%. All businesses are the same. At the core, they all are. They all have three legs of the stool. You have acquisitions, you have operations, you have finance. That's it. So you got to figure out a way to acquire customers, bring them into the funnel. You got to figure out how to operate. So that's how do you create the product? How do you distribute the product? How do you fulfill on the orders that you're getting? And then the finances, how do you speak the language of business? How do you manage cash flows, accounts receivable, payable? Like how do you manage a balance sheet, right? Like that's the actual nuts and bolts of what a business is. Those are the three layers. If you can build a business that brings customers in, and then you can fulfill for less than the cost of bringing in those customers and the less than it costs to produce the product, you're going to do well, assuming that you also can manage the finances. And so once you get down to it, like regardless of if the business is a window washing company or a manufacturing company or real estate, the question is always, how am I getting customers in? How am I fulfilling on them? And how am I managing my cash flows? If you can understand those three things, you're going to do well, regardless of where you put your time and energy. Because here's the thing about like, I love all three of these, but the thing that like is my superpower is the acquisitions. Like, how do I get customers in there? Customers are humans, right? Yeah. Like unless you found a way to like, I don't know, turn llamas into a client, like all of your clients are human, which means they are all subject to human behavior. And if you can understand human psychology, both on the individual, but also on the group level, that's all marketing is. That's all acquisitions really is understanding human behavior. And then how can I tell a story in a compelling way that makes people want to do business with me? So like, you don't need to master all three of these things. Also, like you can find a partner, find somebody who's really good at one of these, and focus on your unique zone of genius. But just recognize that like business is business. It's a lot simpler than you think, but a whole lot harder too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that saying, it's simple, but not easy.
Yep, exactly.
Let's talk about real estate. So what do you do as of today with real estate?
Yeah. So we're a multifamily acquisition firm. There's a couple of different aspects of what we do. So first is we're vertically integrated. So we go out, we buy apartment buildings throughout the Twin Cities. And then we're vertically integrated, which means that we have an in-house property management company. So we have leasing agents, repair and maintenance managers who are working day-to-day with our residents and managing our asset. Now to go and acquire these assets, sometimes we use our own money. Quite often we work with investors. So retail investors who, maybe it's like a lawyer or a CPA or a teacher, a firefighter, somebody who has some extra cash. They don't want to invest in the stock market. They want to invest in real estate, but they don't want to do the work of dealing with toilets, tenants, trash. So they work with us. They provide capital. We go out, we buy the assets, we partner together, we operate it. It's a win-win. So like when I talked about the three stools of, a business, recognize that every real estate deal needs three things. It needs somebody who has the time, somebody who has the experience, and somebody who has the capital, but not all three need to come from the same place, right? And so time is who's going to actually go out there, find the deals and run the deals. Experience is who actually knows how to run the deal. Like once we have the thing, what do we do with it? Capital is how do we buy the thing? How do we finance this? And so we bring the time and the experience and a bit of the capital, but the majority of the capital that we use to go and acquire these multi-million-dollar properties is by partnering with 15 to 20 investors who each bring maybe $50,000 to $100,000 into the deal. We go take it down together.
And then you would raise the capital and even like, I'm assuming get a bank loan as well, right? With the
Yep, exactly. So typically we go and we get a loan for about 75% of the value of the property, which means that we need to bring about 25% for the down payment, plus whatever is needed for capital expenditures or repairs and all these other things. So it ends up being what we need to raise in equity or bring in capital is more than 25%. But that's the great thing about real estate, right? Like we get to use leverage. We get to use other people's money, whether that's the debt or the equity, to go and acquire things. And that just has such a multiplicative effect on our returns. That's one of the things that just makes this vehicle just so darn powerful.
Yeah, it's a win-win for the investors and for the general partners, right? Because the general partners wouldn't be able to do these large deals without the investors, and then vice versa. The investor, somebody with $50,000, can't buy a $10 million building, but you could when you're partnered with other people.
Yeah, together we are strong, right? Yeah. Individually we are weak, but together we are mighty, or something like that. Like the thing with real estate, it's really interesting. Like I started in 2012, and I didn't really start raising capital until 2019, and that's because I ran out of money. Like there comes a point when if you're trying to do it all on your own, where you're going to run out of money, you're going to run out of opportunities. And so to keep scaling, the question becomes, well, how do I bring in more capital, or how do I bring in more deals? So everybody's going to have to solve that for themselves at some point.
Absolutely. And your main focus is multifamily? Like you don't do self-storage or industrial or other?
No. Yeah, we're multifamily guys. I'm a firm believer, like pick a lane, get good at that thing. It's boring, but the more you do a thing, the better you become at it, the less riskier it becomes. And when it comes to investing, that's the name of the game. How do we incrementally mitigate risk over time? Because if you take care of the downside, the upside takes care of itself with real estate, right? So the question is, how do I make this investment progressively less riskier? And the best way that I know how to do that is to continue doing that thing over and over and over and becoming better and better and better at it, right? Like we become the de-risked hedge because we are so good at what we do.
That makes sense. And that's, to add to that point, I think the advantage of investing in the stock market, like instead of investing, because when you invest in the stock market, you can't do these things. You can't really individually mitigate these risks in these companies. Mm-hmm. Nobody really knows what's going to happen with the companies and the markets and whatever, all these external factors. But with real estate, you could, especially when you're the general partner and you're working closely with the limited partners, there's more control, right?
100%. Yeah. When 2020 hit, because we are boots on the ground and working with our residents, we're able to call them up the next day and say, hey, here's a list of all the local agencies that you can reach out to. Here's how to get on their list for rent relief and, aid if you laid off of work or for whatever reason. Like we are able to be proactive and get in front of this. Whereas when I invest in stock of Tesla, I'm like, Elon, good luck, Godspeed. I hope you know what you're doing. I don't get his phone number. I can't call him up and be like, hey, what you doing over here? Can I help? One of the cool things about being a passive investor, on one hand, you don't get much control, right? Like we always talk about the syndication model being like the jumbo jet. If you want to fly from New York to Paris, you don't need to go buy a plane and get your pilot's license. You don't have to get in the plane and fly your ass over to Paris, right? You can just buy a plane ticket, get on a plane where Delta has already bought the plane. They have a pilot who's trained. They have flight attendants. They have ground control. You just sit in the back and they fly you there, right? That's like being a passive investor. You buy the plane ticket, you get on, and you get the benefits of this jumbo jet. But you don't get much say in anything on that plane. You don't get to go up when there's turbulence and talk to the pilot and be like, I think we should do this. It's the same thing in a syndication. You don't really get control. Mm-hmm. That can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, if you're a passive investor and you call me up and you say, hey, is there anything, like I know we're going through a rough time right now with COVID and all this stuff. Here's maybe how I can help. I'm really good at X, Y, and Z. Would this be of any benefit? I might be receptive to it. I might be like, yeah, dude, like you're really good at this thing. Like, cool. Like let's utilize that. So like there are ways that you could potentially be useful. It's like on that plane, somebody has a heart attack and they stand up like, do we have a doctor on the plane? You're like, I'm a doctor. Like, cool. Now maybe you're useful. So it's like there's ways that you could be useful still within a syndication and show some control. So long story, weird story.
Yeah. And I mean, perfect example. That makes a lot of sense is that to get into real estate, you don't have to, as a limited partner, you don't have to go out and hire a lawyer who has SEC knowledge and, create a PPM and all these legal documents. It's already established. You could just invest in the deal passively and that's already taken care of. And then also I think with control comes responsibility. So yeah, you don't have control, but you also don't have responsibility, right? It's like, it's a good thing and a bad thing, both ways.
Yeah. The other part of that is not just responsibility, but we'll call it liability.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, if somebody gets drunk and drives their car through the front lobby of the apartment building and kills somebody, like nobody's calling you up and taking you to court, right? Or if somebody slips and falls on the sidewalk, nobody's taking you to court. If the general partners, for whatever reason, the deal goes south, the bank has to foreclose on the building, they're not coming after your assets as the limited partner. It's great.
Yeah.
It sucks if you're a general partner and things do go wrong because your butt is on the hot seat, but that's what you signed up for.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's essentially your job. Like you're actively involved in the business.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. And then Anthony, you also wrote a book, right? Passive Investing Made Simple.
That's right. Yep.
So walk us through that. What was the process like writing the book? And then, what does the book talk about?
So the book initially began because we had so many conversations with new investors where we were just outlining, like, hey, what's a syndication? What's multifamily? Why do we like these things? And when I sit down and I talk to you for an hour, if this was the first time we ever talked about multifamily syndications, you might get 82% of it, but that missing 18% is enough for you to feel still a little bit uneasy and not yet ready to take action, right? And so we wanted to create a resource where people could consume it at their own pace, on their own time, to have a resource that they could go back to and be like, hey, I don't remember exactly what CapEx was or what a cap rate is. Like, you can go back and you can dive into that without feeling like you're constantly calling up somebody and be like, hey, can you explain this to me again? Right. So I wanted to create a resource that people could hopefully have this thing broken down in a way that it makes sense. Because I think so often when it comes to investing, we all feel slightly overwhelmed by the concept of investing, because I don't think school did a good job preparing anybody to invest, or like money management skills. And most families don't talk about this at the dinner table. So most people feel kind of alone and scared and a little overwhelmed. And as a result, they don't know what they're doing. And so they outsource maybe to a financial advisor, to a stockbroker, and like, here, you take my money and do something with it. And hopefully it works out. But then like, they still never feel super confident of what's happening with their money. Are they really on track? And so, like I said before, been in a lot of businesses, and real estate's the simplest one. And so I wanted to write something that, regardless of where you're coming from in your life, you could understand the concept well enough to say, I know what to do now. I know how to vet an operator. I know how to analyze a market, and I know how to underwrite a deal. I know how to do those three things. And because I know how to do those three things, I'm ready to start taking action and investing in this vehicle. And the coolest thing about this book has been the amount of people that have reached out after the fact. They don't even want to invest with us, because the book really isn't like a plug to invest with us. It's like, my big goal is to get as many people investing in real estate and to own a piece of it. Because I think everybody should own a piece of real estate. Yeah. It's the best investment vehicle out there. And I think it's a crime that it's so easy to invest in the stock market, but so hard to invest in real estate. And so I want this book to change people's paradigm and realize you can do this. Yeah. And so the coolest messages I get are from people who are like, I knew nothing about this. I stumbled across your book, or somebody gave it to me. And like, now I invested in so-and-so's deal. I'm like, that's super cool. That's awesome to hear. So that's what it's about.
Okay. Awesome. And how can listeners find the book?
Yeah, it's been sitting on the top 10 of Amazon on commercial real estate for like the last 8 months. So you can go there. You can go to thepassiveinvestingbook.com, and if you just pay shipping, which is like $9, you can get a copy of the book shipped out to you. Or if you're cheap, like I am, I'm super cheap, but I'm pathologically frugal. I don't mind spending, like, the only thing I don't mind spending money on is books. Yeah. But if you're one of those people who's like, I don't want to pay $9 for a book, I get it. It's cool. Here's what you can do to get a free copy: is you go and you leave a review for this podcast on iTunes or wherever. And then you shoot me an email, Anthony@invictusmultifamily.com, and say, hey, I left a review for that podcast that you were on. Sorry. Now give me my book, and I'll send you a copy of the book for free. That's all you got to do. Leave a review. It's free.
Okay. We'll put in those instructions in the show notes. Yeah, for sure. Well, Anthony, it was a pleasure having you on. I'm looking forward to having you back on. Are there any other links that listeners can go to other than your book to learn more about you?
Yeah, if you want to learn about what we do on the investment side, you can go to invictusmultifamily.com. Otherwise, if you want to learn about what I do around helping entrepreneurs live a life of amplified impact, you can go to anthonyvicino.com. You can find me literally on all the social medias. Except for TikTok, I'm not there yet. I'm slow.
Maybe a good thing.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, Anthony. Nice having you on. I'm looking forward to having you back on in the future.
All right, thanks, man.
To learn more about what we do and how we can help you grow more wealth, please visit www.finassetprotection.com. That's FIN assetprotection.com. The topics presented in this podcast are for general information only and not for the purposes of providing legal, accounting, or investment advice. On such matters, please consult a professional who knows your specific situation.